there. And anyway, so as you all know, of course, director of Cal Poly LA Metro, this off-campus program here in Los Angeles, where we have 36 students now coming down from the main campus to intern in studio in offices, and we have our studio with a number of faculty now. It's a fourth-year undergraduate BR program. It's always to remind us, because the level sometimes is surprising. Anyway, here are our wonderful students. They put this together. Super fun. Hopefully our last Zoom events for a while, I hope. It's been a long year of Zoom for all of us, right? So of course I direct in the program, but also teach and design. We have Joanna Grant. I think Joanna's with us in sound here. She's been teaching in the program. Great to have you, and see Julia's arriving. We also had Jimenez Lai teaching with us in the first quarter. It's a 20-week program, so we were broken down into 2 quarters. Ismael Soto also teaching with us in design and computational work. He's over at UCLA as well. Pavel Getov, who everyone knows and we all love and are grateful to have him for number of years teaching in our program. It's a fairly integrated design studio, so we all work synergistically as a group on all the design projects. Teddy Slowick also teaching with us. He also teaches at Woodbury over there with Ingalil, and design and practice, and he's been with us for a while too, teaching with the students. Fabio Zangoli brings structures to the team, and Sarah Hearn and Tina Sorio teach in our history theory program. So this morning, running till about 11:30, we have a terrific group of reviewers. Matthew Butcher from the Bartlett coming to us from London. Thank you for your time. Oh, actually, Adam's supposed to be here. I don't know where he is, but if he shows up, Adam Nathaniel Furman, also from London. He just might pop in at some random moment. Paul Lewis, of course, actually interned to some of our students this year. Thank you, Paul. You know, we had this really wild opportunity to intern people nationally. So that was exciting. From LTL in Princeton, Associate Dean. Julia Corner, I think I saw you pop in. There you are.
Hi.
Hey, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
It's been a while. Julia Corner, JK, also teaching at UCLA. Dwayne Euler Wu from SciArc. Thank you, Dwayne, for showing up and being part of this team today. He also interns our students, so we're very grateful. Scott Uriu also has been interning our students. Thank you, Scott, for a long time now, B+U and USC. And then Ingalil Walrus Ritter from the Dean of Woodbury. Thank you. It's always great to have you come to our final reviews. Really appreciate it. We have 4 students, Alina, Max, Alexander, and Varun, who will be presenting today. I'm going to just really briefly run through just some of the stuff to know what we've been up to. We did something a little different this year. We entered the low-rise competition. We've been doing housing for about 4 or 5 years. And so we did high-rise and mid-rise. So we turned to low-rise this year. And we entered the competition, and faculty members, spelled incorrectly there, I just noticed, Joanna Grant and Jimenez Lai, Bureau Spectacular, won honorable mention. So we're proud of that. And one of our students actually won, Erica David, with her project in the redistribution category. So that was really exciting that we were able to pull that off. You know, we entered, all 36 students did the project. We entered 12. So I think we did well. Then we turned back to our sort of normal way of doing things. We began with sort of an architectural project where we investigate computational solids, thinking about inside, outside spaces and between spaces, looking at section, looking also at section in relationship and to building a site, so that there's some interaction between those on an architectural language level, that all the students will end up having their own kind of investigation. We started a program which is about a 210,000 square foot low rise. This is actually a smaller project for us. Typically, we've gone up to 1.25 million square feet. So this is been really interesting to try this one out, and it'll also have a different kind of campus-like engagement. It's a multi-income housing project with a wide variety of mixed uses, boutique and transient space, hotels. We have a social and health services built into the project. There's creative office space, retail, and there's a significant amount of public interior and exterior urban spaces in between. Kind of the theme of the project. So 210,000 square feet, 60,000 square feet of it is public commercial program, 50,000 square feet is flexible creative office space, 100,000 square feet, basically half of the program, is housing and the hotel. The hotels are quite small, 9,000 and 12,000 square feet, and half really is mid to low income affordable housing. Also very important to mix in, of course, transitional family housing, which is quite small, but then also high to mid income housing, because we want it to be a multi-income community. And then 210,000 square feet is the public landscaped spaces with the underground parking. This gives you a sense of our site. The site is Echo Park. We chose that actually long before the issues surrounding Echo Park, but knowing that those concerns were out there. And so we have an interesting location. It's right on the corner of Echo Park Avenue and Sunset Boulevard. Sunset is really the commercial strip that's being heavily gentrified over the many years, and Echo Park takes you up into the hills. And we have a fairly large lot right at that corner and intersection. This gives you an idea of the general visuals of the space. It's definitely kind of got an arty feel, a little bohemian energy going on in the Echo Park area still. And then it gets much more gentrified as you go down Sunset. This is really where there's a Walgreens and a fancy organic food store that we've taken out. And this will be really where our site is. The site is 300 by 325. It's a little bit of a corner edge there that adds a little bit more. Then we end up with about 110,000 square foot lot. So going up 4 stories, 45 feet max, and 210,000 square feet, we end up with a 50% porosity. And that'll kind of give you an idea of how to, it'll become obvious once you start to see what we do. So the 3 kind of strategies: having an architectural concept, engaging in form and material, having an urban concept, engaging site strategies, and then having an organizational programmatic concept that's going to deal with some socio-political interests of the students as they work out their projects. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Alina and go quiet. Thank you, everybody, for being with us.
Okay, hello, everyone. My name is Aliana, and in this project, I was mostly focusing on first the scale of the parts of the project, and then the homogeneity of those modules that I will be having, and the courtyard hierarchy, ranging them from a large to medium and small spaces, creating a lot of spaces in between. So in the overall picture of the project, you can see how those smaller parts with even smaller elements inside of them compose a single image, similar to how pixels compose a picture, varying in shades. So in the program diagram, you can see how I placed all of the community spaces in the podium level, and then some of them are placed on the roofs of the office modules located in between of the housing. So the housing modules are all intermixed, and that's why their shades are varying. Hotels, the boutique hotel and the transient hotel also have those kind of shades, but I treated them in terms of temporality, so they're also parts of this housing, but just a little bit different. In the circulation diagram, you can see how there are a lot of outdoor spaces located on the roof of the podium, and then they are located on the roofs of the community and office spaces, and are connected by some sort of bridges. So you can see a loop circulation going on. And also the orange color corresponds to exterior vertical circulation, indicating the sunken courtyard access, and also the access to the podium level, and smaller pieces indicate the access to smaller housing modules. Here are the floor plans, and then the floor plan of the underground parking, and you can see how the sunken courtyard is allocated at the same level, and there is an access to it from the parking garage. On the ground floor plan, you can see the you can see how I placed the retail and cafes and restaurants in this volume, and then the market and grocery in the upper right corner. All of these programs correspond to the context of the site. So the market and grocery can be accessed by people, mostly residential in this upper right corner, and then the daycare located here is linked to the education area in this part of the site. So the hotel and the cafe and retail are looking toward the Sunset Boulevard, and then the circulation on the ground floor is going around the whole site. In the podium roof floor plan, you can see more of those outdoor places, and then some of the housing modules also have their smaller courtyards with a larger courtyard located in between the housing modules. And then the typical upper floor housing plan just features the community spaces appearing in between of the housing modules, and then the office places sort of connecting them and forming a chain. So in this section, I just wanted to showcase more of those outdoor spaces. And then this element of event center also repeats the sunken courtyard formation. In the elevation, you can see, so I was actually thinking of placing different kinds of materials, sort of giving an identity to the typology. So I use the GFRC panels for the housing and for hotels, and then the corrugated metal for more of the community spaces, with some transitional elements, such as perforated metal screen connecting those elements in between. And then here is the chunk of the community space, and you can see how the office and then the community are connected by the roof and the bridge. And then you can see the element of the podium vertical circulation and then the residential circulation element. I also wanted to place this sunken courtyard amphitheater with a multifunctional gathering, performing, and projecting space in the center. And then here is the rendering of the office showcasing the double height space and overlooking to the courtyard. And then this is a view from the Sunset Boulevard, looking at this office space, the hotel here, and you can see how those colors correspond a little bit to the murals located in the area. So speaking more about the housing modules, I was mostly focusing on this in-between circulation, creating a sort of a community so that compared to a corridor system, people would have fewer neighbors and possibly would engage more by this. And all of those housing modules are very are different, and then you can see more of the floor plans of that were located in those modules. So here is the chunk of the housing module, and I used a concrete structure system for the podium level, and you can see the retail and so actually the restaurant space here, and then the community space just under the housing module with wood framing used for residential. These are just some of the details, a detail of a curved wall on the ground floor, and then the envelope roof detail with GFRC panels transitioning into the roof. And then this is just a rendering of the courtyard, and the colors here was potentially would be used for easier identification of the housing and just for easier navigation throughout the building. Okay, and this is the final rendering of the housing from the Sunset Boulevard. Thank you. I will now share my concept board.
You all should have received concept board links. Those are just for your background information so you can see what the work looks like.
Can you see the concept board? Just want
Looks
to make
good.
sure.
Yeah.
Yes, we
Okay.
can see it.
Thank you.
Well, Elena, probably I'm the most insecure here, so I'm just going to dive in first. So in any case, you know, I really like your project. I think it's really well drawn, well documented, you know, fairly easy to understand, nice plans. You have a nice hand on these things. But if I were to sort of poke at it just a hair, I would argue there is, and granted, I think you're solving a lot of great things with the sort of unifying language that you have, and what you were describing as sort of this homogeneity in there. But I would argue it's a bit cacophony driven in a way, in that, you know, I cannot tell, I know you've talked about it, I can't tell the housing from the office, from the grocery store, from anything. And there's sort of and I don't even care actually if it would be some sort of color as well. I mean, you have to freaking paint this thing anyway, you know, why the hell do you have to paint it all white, you know, is one of my big things with this. But also, I think there could be some sort of response in some of the form or language as well, because otherwise, I do foresee this as eventually it'll be just sort of human nature taking over some of this, where, you know, it'll be signage and hotel signage and restaurant signage, or you know, sort of office signage that's going to be the main dominant moniker and markers for this. And I'm going to argue that I think you want to sort of address this in a slightly stronger sensibility of taking that territory into an architectural language, just, you know, as a piece of advice though too. But nonetheless, I mean, you know, again, great job, and I know I can see the effort that you've put into this. So, you know, my pokes I think are fairly mundane, if that. But again, there are things you can look at. You know, MVRDV has done this multiple times with, say, Silo Dam or something of that nature, where you're sort of color coding, not just in a program diagram, but perhaps in almost reality of what is behind the facades, or what means what, and how you can navigate around a you know, place. You could argue against this though too, and saying that I'm making it so generic that anything can be anything though too. But in any case, that's my comment on yours.
So let me add some comments. I agree. I think you very impressed, Alina, with the command that you have. It is a very complex project that Stephen, I know you love these huge projects. Full disclosure, I live right up the street, up in the hills overlooking this. So I know this neighborhood very well. There's a lot I like about it. And this corner in particular, I don't know how much you know about it. Stephen referenced the homelessness issue, where all of the homeless that were living in Echo Park were displaced. But even before that, this corner is, you know, when Biden was elected, the Black Lives Matter, you know, this is a corner that actually attracts people, and it is a sort of a public plaza. And I wonder, when I look at your project, where the public plaza could be, because I think there's opportunity to make a real place here. And this is Los Angeles. I mean, Los Angeles has a lot of complex spaces that I love. But I also think that in this neighborhood in particular, I think the scale that you're working with is appropriate. I think I really like the elevation. I'm imagining it very comfortably in terms of the scale with the immediate neighborhood, which is a sort of assemblage of, you know, low-rise residential, but also retail right on Sunset Boulevard. And I think that this could, I see your courtyard spaces. I feel like those could be amplified, and it doesn't only have to be on the ground plane, but it could also be up higher. And I think that really thinking through how the public could occupy this corner would be a really exciting other layer that you could bring to what I think is a very confident, mature, and accomplished project.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. I mean, I'm struck by the degree to which you've tried to avoid repetition and yet have a kind of coherence of form making and space making that seems kind of both equitable and homogeneous and yet not repetitive. I mean, so there's a really interesting way in which you're working with this kind of almost the kind of aggregation of idiosyncratic part that's aggregated at a very similar scale that produces this building that almost appears to be designed by multiple people, yet clearly has a single aesthetic. And you know what I find really intriguing is you look at this thing. I'm trying to figure out what the logic that drove it. You know, the parking garage is very peculiar. The floor plans are very peculiar. Every floor plan has a kind of an idiosyncrasy. You know, you're working with the fillets both in plan and in section to produce difference, and yet it's at a very similar scale, right? So I think the kind of question of what is this, you know, what is it about this kind of particular scale that you find compelling? Should it be larger or smaller? I think I would like to hear a little bit more about why this is the right scale to generate this project and why the self-similarity of scale is important. The other thing that starts to creep in here is a kind of an obsession with as much envelope as possible. I can't think of a porous project that would fill this site that would have more perimeter. I mean, there's so, and I think for you to then argue that that's actually the driving, you know, it's the windows that both look inside to the courtyards as well as to the street. It's the maximization of perimeter that's actually the driving characteristic of the project. And then really make an argument about the nature of perimeter. I think it's lurking in a lot of the projects representations, but that would be something that I want to have a little bit more knowledge about. And then for you to say within that, that's where the fillet comes in. It's not just an aesthetic trope brought in from, you know, last couple of years, but I'm using it instrumentally for this reason, right? It allows me to turn corners, allows me to have elevations that have extrusions, et cetera. So, but I think the project is really, really interesting and complex. And I think to take it apart, particularly the plans, is a real kind of pleasure to look through it. My one critique, though, would be that I think if you look at the longitudinal sections, you rely a little bit too heavily on the kind of pancake and kind of cutting into the pancake. You know, one would think that with this aggregation of parts that you show in the exploded axonometric, then in fact, there could be some slight variation to the floor plates. So they're not just, you know, a kind of podium level and then, you know, self-similar. If you're interested in this perimeter and the way in which it's going to produce these local, I assume local kind of connections between neighbors and between different types of programs, then being able to bring the section into that a little bit more playfully, not just carving voids, which you did really good job on, but looking at ways there could be alignments between windows or misalignments, et cetera. But it's a really intriguing and well-developed project. And yeah, Stephen, these are huge. These are such challenging projects that to have this level of development is impressive.
Thank you. Just a little bit about, I think, the formation of the project regarding the shapes, and just wanted to take a look more closely to the dissimulation studies that we had previously. So I think I just drove a lot of inspiration from kind of those forms that I had as at that stage. I was really interested in like creating those smaller modules and then making a composition out of them. So this is what I brought to this project.
I think, yeah, that's clear, but the question is why? Like, what do you get out of that, right? You know, particularly when you start interfacing with questions of housing and different natures of housing and interior and exterior. So I don't know what the consequences of that particular massing and form making study are. I think it's implied, and I think you kind of have a sense of what you're doing, Actually, I think you have a very good idea, but being more explicit about how you're instrumentalizing the perimeter within this kind of three-dimensional porosity, I think would be great.
I think I want to follow up on Paul's comment. So first, Alina, congratulations for creating a really wonderful visualization of your project. And I think you really have beautiful renderings, beautiful drawings, and very well executed work up there. I think following up on those kind of earlier studies which you just referenced, I find those really beautiful, and kind of the formal exercise of it translated really well into the building design. And I think that you showcase like that you have a kind of design skill set in accomplishing the geometries and visualization of it. However, I think that I agree that why are those formal explorations interesting, or what's the thoughts behind it? And maybe maybe that also then results in this kind of aesthetic, which we are already familiar with. It's nothing new, I would say, the aesthetic, what we are seeing here. I think that the kind of formal agenda is something which is almost like a default, I would say. And I find I would see an opportunity in there if you, for example, would in those earlier studies have looked more into the materials. You maybe would have looked into GFRC and the corrugated metal and so on. I know I saw you had those in your kind of final drawings, and kind of understand how these materials actually work and how they are produced. Maybe that could have been like an opportunity for you to rethink some of the aesthetics you kind of maybe fell into as a desire for visualization. But I see an opportunity for you there in the future to kind of look more into what do these materials, what are they made of? How are they connecting? How are they coming together? What kind of resulting geometrical changes do I have to make to my design in order to work with those materials? And then that kind of perhaps allows you to come up with a little bit more of your own techniques and design aesthetics, which I would desire to see in the project in the future. So that would be my only critique. But you have really done an amazing job in putting together this big project.
Hi, Elena. I'll jump in and give my thoughts. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's a really comprehensive design. I mean, like everyone, I'm incredibly impressed the level of resolution. I just want to pick up some points that Julia was, I think, starting to or raising really, and it kind of goes back to I suppose very much where I'm coming from, I suppose, and the relationship to, I suppose, how we work over in London at the Bartlett, which is really kind of focused on process. And I was quite interested in your presentation to kind of arrive at the conclusion, if you like, in the sense of a body of exploration, and I was really, I suppose, slightly taken off center a bit by the discussion about the reasoning for how the forms arrive to kind of appear on the border at the end. But I don't think that's a problem. I think it's an interesting way of presenting the work, and it may be kind of to do with two different approaches, two different schools, two different ethoses. And it kind of got me thinking about this thing that James Sterling used to say, that he used to describe to the English what the building did, and then to the Germans he described what it meant. And I think there's a sense that I kind of get what this is, but I'm not quite sure what it means. And I just wanted to go back to those earlier studies and interrogate a bit more the reasoning for the kind of process you underwent in terms of removing voids, or in terms of these kind of formal explorations. And can you explain to me a bit how that study went about, and that kind of starting point, and what you were kind of trying to investigate with that?
So I think in both of the studies, in my previous my previous project, I was investigating how I could like modify one single unit by a simple operation, and then I could repeat it in different ways, and then create those in between spaces, connecting by like more of the solid and elements. So it was really in this study, I think it's showcasing this kind of porosity and like how those voids can create a space from the void and from the composition of the voids together. And then in this study, I was mostly interested in I think the contrast of these also repetitive elements, and then like one single form connecting them together, and like how those repetitive elements were in between of that form. So
Yeah, that's great. It's really useful. I think kind of going back to the kind of earlier comment about the location and I suppose the juxtaposition between the different functions or the different programs that exist on the site. I think as another study, if you have time or something to think about over, over the summer, would be to really consider very key moments that you might choreograph in terms of the relationships that how the site or the city might interact with a project through these kind of almost in sometimes very choreographed juxtapositions that appear in the voids or ones that are haphazard and actually trying to set up maybe a kind of a design strategy which isn't necessarily about the organization of programs and space, but also potentially about event. And I think that might be a way for you to consider the site in the way that some of the comments have kind of raised, that you actually have a system in place that is there in that context, but now let the context start to influence potentially where the voids might be, that it doesn't necessarily just, you're not just acting on the operation of the design process, if that makes sense. It starts to become more contextual in that way, because I think that the way that people are talking about that site, I don't know it, but it sounds kind of fascinating, the nature of what that place is, and for that to kind of come back in, it's slightly reframing your position as a designer could be quite interesting. But I think it's a really interesting piece of work. As a tourist, it feels very LA to me. I don't know if that's something other people feel. It's got that kind of something about also the renders, the sun, give it that sensibility. I kind of feel when I look at the drawings that I am in LA in some way.
I think you've done a really nice job, particularly in terms of development of every aspect of it, the plans, the renderings, understanding the diagrams. I think a lot of the questions that are coming at you are largely because we start from the very first slide you show, and we already have a kind of village scheme. And understanding why a village is, and this is true whether we're talking about the process that gets you there in terms of the form and the juxtaposition of types of shape making, or we're talking about the scale of the units and the aggregation, or we're talking about the need for a larger public plaza. It really goes back to it, like, what are the fundamental decisions about what this neighborhood or this city essentially needs? Why does it need this kind of village breakdown? I don't know. I think there's probably an argument to be made for that. I didn't hear a strong argument for that. We make a lot of presumptions that the use of light, breaking down the scale to deal with a more residential neighborhood that surrounds it, those all make sense. But it would be helpful in the very beginning of the project for you to couple your urban and social ambitions with the formal agenda that we see in the earlier studies. I like a lot of the early concept studies a lot, particularly the one that you point to a lot, which are the kind of blocks with the infill happening in between. I will say that I think it got a little domesticated in the need to just develop it into buildings, and I wish that it kept some of the edge that you see in those earlier models. I probably would have considered ways to break down the homogeneity of it. Meaning, I think there was probably a way to think of it in terms of aggregated smaller components, but to also think more collectively about grouping or collecting things in a way that would prevent a homogeneity of readings. Right now, you essentially, in order to create coherence, have relied on color and kind of stylistic, the fillets, as Paul points out, to make it all look coherent. But I think there could have been ways to group them into larger groupings that would have made it have a reading that was something other than aggregated. It could have sat somewhere between aggregated and a more compositional set of larger elements. I think those two things can exist simultaneously, but it's tricky. But nice job.
Yeah, I'm just gonna summarize so we can move on. I mean, Elena, as you clearly have heard, it's an exceptionally well-developed project on so many levels. And I think with a kind of, I mean, you have a very sophisticated group of reviewers, so I hope you appreciate and enjoy that. And I think the articulation of, you have a dispersal scheme and it's highly dispersed with a medium size of pocket parks all around it. And there's a politic to that, which I think Ngalo kind of hinted to in some ways, that one might argue that has a sort of, it's a dispersal technique. I actually really appreciate the way you were able to manage it at such a sophisticated level. But because of the hierarchy that Scott also points out is not necessarily there, for whatever reason, you could argue. You can argue why you want a dispersal scheme. One might argue it could support a form of gentrification versus public engagement in mass. And that could be a politic. It may not be the politic you want, but that's also what's being implied here. So it's like, as you get to thesis and move on, start to understand that on one level, you can manage the project beautifully. Everyone's asking you to go to the next level and question those moves as they actually engage a political statement that you're actually making, which you maybe aren't entirely in control of, but you are making it. And I actually think it's an interesting one. And I'm happy that you were part of our team and you're just so talented. So I think you'll have a great future. No worries on that one. Anyway, thank you so much. And thank you, reviewers. And let's move to Max. Thank you. It's really great.
Thank you so much to everyone. I appreciate it.
Max, are you out there? Alina, you probably need to stop sharing your screen. There you go. Great. Thank you so much. Really mesmerizingly good.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Max Heinz. Thank you all for coming. So my project is Connections Unbounded. So it kind of starts off with changing slides. There we go. It starts off with these kind of 4 different community centers placed throughout the project at different levels. The first community would be the Grocery and Eating Court. This is centered on the 1st floor and partially the 2nd floor, where the users of the hotel and the office, and of course the public and residents often use. And I'll go into more detail of them later. The second community is this gym and exercise rooms, where it's placed on the 3rd and 4th floor, forcing the public, if they want to come into the building and go and intersect and interact with the people of the residents and also the office space. The third community is the kind of this library education facility. This is placed on the 2nd and 3rd floors, directly next to the micro units and transitional housing. And of course, this is open to the public. And then the 4th community is this kind of amphitheater mixed use space. You can kind of see on the third floor, it's a kind of larger open area, and then down below it's a more open mixed use space. But then before we get up to those levels, I was using this idea of stairways and I guess breaking the transition between the very public ground floor areas and the more private residential areas above. So in a residential area, we would have this kind of stair community to slow down kind of the traffic and the people moving throughout and create those community relationships around there. Whereas maybe towards the office space, you might have these faster stairways, and then these different areas centered, maybe at cafes like this one, where the stairs actually become a table or a bench. So then, next slide. So in this one, we are looking at the first community center. You can kind of see the circulation of how the users might go throughout. And this kind of creates this relationship between the hotel users and the office spaces, which you usually might not get, but both are needing food and at lunch and maybe at breakfast. So you kind of create these new connections between the two. Skipping up to community center number 4, just because it's on this ground plan, is the amphitheater. And it's kind of small, but you can see the low income is mixed with the high income in this kind of center where they intermingle and really intersect with each other. So in the community center number 2 is the gym and exercise space where you might get most of the users being from the office and the residents, transitional family and low-income housing in this area. And then the gym might expand into the open office space after hours, and creating this kind of forced circulation for the boutique hotel users where they have to go through and intermingle with people they usually wouldn't see at these kind of courtyards. And yeah, and then I dove a little deeper in the kind of community center 3 that looks at the library and micro housing, transitional family housing, and this kind of relationship in between of these kind of public service spaces and social service spaces. So in the kind of chunk or wall section of that community space, you can see where the upper floors of the boutique hotel users might have to travel down through other residential spaces into the main food area, and they all would interact there, as well as in the kind of public spa and community space below. And then here in the section cutting through close to Echo Park, you can see the kind of different centers. On the left is the community center with the gym, which is next to the office spaces and the residents. And this is a great space where they can interact and intermingle, creating these kind of new relationships. And then the other community center is on the far right, where the hotel users and the residents interact in the kind of food area and spa. And then in this section, you can see the amphitheater where these high to low income housing units kind of all intersect and intermingle, kind of creating this. There's also this daycare space where they can all drop off their kids before work.
Are you done, Max? Or
this is the last slide. There's this elevation that you can see the stairways going up, kind of forcing people to go in, and yeah, that's about it.
well, I'm going to jump in here because I love your project, Max, and I want to tell you why. So as I mentioned before, I live in Echo Park, and Echo Park is historically known as Red Hill. And I don't know if you studied the history, but Red Hill was a reference to the immigrants who came, the communist immigrants. So it has retained very much a socialist politics. The other thing that I think that everybody should be aware of is you're in the shadow, of course, of Dodger Stadium. And I hope you know the history of Chavez Ravine and the destruction of the incredibly vital and vibrant neighborhood, the Chicano neighborhood that was here, that was destroyed when they built Dodger Stadium. And I mentioned those two because I'm glad you stopped here, because in a way, I think your project is Red Hill, whether you knew it or not. So I think the color has this amazing reference to it, but I think your program is particularly appropriate when you talk about these social service spaces. And I loved when you were walking us through and talking about, spaces for the people. And I think whether you know it or not, I think that resonates very, very powerfully. But I want to reference, there's an architect I want to let you know about. Her name is Mena Agha, A-G-H-A. And our students here at Woodbury invited her as part of a roundtable called Spaces of Resistance. And she's a Nubian architect. And when you were showing these very sort of modest scaled public spaces, the stair spaces and the collecting spaces, it made me think of her architecture. She talks about Nubia. And if you don't know about it, you should investigate, because that's an incredible history. It's near Egypt, but you were creating spaces that I think are modest and yet powerful and are a gift to people who are occupying your building. So I'll leave it there, but I think that you are referencing a really interesting Echo Park vernacular that I think is spot on. And whether you know it or not, I think it's incredibly rich and appropriate, all of these references that I was just referring to. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Max, well done. I'm going to pretend that you heard everything I said about Elena's, because I would repeat that. But on a totally different take, though, I would argue great architecture is a combination between fact and fiction, is what it is. And I think going off on Ingalill's line as well, I think you've got a great story set up, but I don't think how you're describing it, how you're narrating it, how you're fictionalizing it, I think it's not as powerful as it could be. Rather than, a gym, maybe it's an area about health, or it's a library, maybe it's an area about knowledge, or, amphitheater about community or something of that nature, rather than just the pure factoid of oh, it's a freaking grocery store or whatnot. I think there's another sort of archigram. Archigram never freaking, actually drew a decent plan. And obviously you have, great skills in that. They're more about implication, of these great narratives, I would argue, were their best projects. And, I think that's where possibly you have. With that said, I would argue it's hard to get the narrative without you describing it, to us. So I think there is, definitely that sort of, again, the fiction, I think, needs to be emphasized in the project.
Yeah, and I actually want to know a little bit more of the facts. Like, there are aspects of this project I don't know, which is to say that you have incredible amount of detail about those sections down to where the seats are and the development of the kind of particular level. So there's this real interest in the minutia, which I think is amazing. So, but then there's the three-dimensional consequence of this thing. What is the, your plan making is really idiosyncratic. Particularly, it tends to make interiors and then the residual space outside we're left want. We don't know what is that courtyard, and it's a fairly sizable one, but is it all residual, right? Most of those spaces in your courtyard are defined by the outside of a curve, right? So they're kind of spaces of transition. Is it all like that? I think that your elevation should suggest this complex three-dimensional form that suggests that space of the courtyard or the space adjacent to the street is really kind of amazing, but we don't really know. Like, we're really desperate for a three-dimensional study of the whole project to really get an understanding of whether this subtlety of the individual part and the kind of nuance brought to the level of section and seats and program played out through particular objects and furniture, how it actually translates into collective spaces and spaces that enable things that are not specifically programmed by a particular component, right? So the unplanned, the kind of unprogrammed, things that occur. I think you've actually made a really, really intricate public, I would say, or at least somewhat more public collective space in between. I just don't know enough about it. The other thing that is worth kind of just playing out is, and I think this shows a little bit in some of the plan, is that, if you start to kind of imagine those spaces at the outside spaces at the level of detail that you brought to each of those steps, what would happen if those steps were not just of the scale of 6 or 8 feet wide, but were at 15, 20 feet wide? So I want to see that level of nuance brought, not just the individual person walking up, but something at the level of a kind of a little bit more of a collective. So, but yeah, I mean, it's weird. You've got an incredibly three-dimensional project that's almost always represented in 2 dimensions, with the exception of the axonometric section axonometrics. So, so I know it's there. I'm like, wait, there's one more drawing, right? We're missing a drawing here, aren't we? But anyways, I think it's a really, really strong project, and I want to know more.
Yeah, I had similar thoughts, and it was making me think about the previous one. Like, are they intentionally trying to hide the massing strategy, or is there a larger philosophy here of massing is not cool anymore? Because I don't know what the massing is. I know what the elevations produce, and it reminds me of those cities of like those photos of like Istanbul, where you see everything compressed, and we're looking at things that are actually blocks away, and they've been compressed into this 2D image. I'll just reiterate, I think the plans are really fantastic and incredibly well drawn. The section is not as interesting to me, and I think the biggest thing is the repetition of the floor plates. I think this 45-foot height limit, it almost seems like it said, oh, I can get 4 floors and another half in there, and so everything gets equally divided. You did make an attempt to create some spaces in between those where you open them up more, but I think just more irregularity would have produced variety in terms of space and connectivity that could have been a little bit more interesting. I also think that the parking could have helped with that, to show the parking in your section, but then to open that up. The challenge of a lot of these underground parking spaces is to always not make them dark, dank spaces. You could also potentially put a little bit of retail down in there that could work if you opened it up enough. But nice job.
Thank you.
I think maybe something to add on Dwayne's comment on the plans. I was also really interested in learning more about the plans in terms of the kind of turn from 2D to 3D, as I find them exceptionally interesting, and especially the one on the bottom left. But then I feel, for example, when I look at the interior rendering, it's all gray and kind of monotone colors, essentially. And I think that from the exterior, it has these beautiful shades of red and purple and pink and white and cream color. And I think it would be really interesting. I was wondering if I'm in this building on the interior and follow your kind of guidelines of walking through the building, would I ever know where I'm actually within the whole complex? And given that you render everything in this monotone gray colors on the interior, I would probably even more so be lost and not knowing where I am. And so I thought it could be really great to take this concept, what you have on the color scheme on the facade, maybe to the interiority, and kind of make certain spaces from the inside. Okay, now I know I'm in the red space, or now I'm in the purple space, or now I'm in the pink space, and now I'm in the white space. So that you kind of guide the people with a color scheme on the interior, similar like you do it on the exterior, and kind of make this procedural way of how you walk through the spaces that you always kind of know also where you are. I think that would be important given you have such a complex plan layout where somebody could easily get lost, and at the same time get lost and find new interesting spaces. So it seems like it's an exciting way to kind of experience the interior and experience these enigmatic spaces, perhaps with these voids and plazas. But I think that I see potential that you could have worked a little bit more on the interior kind of concepts of colors in relationship to the exterior.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Max. Sorry, I missed the middle of your presentation. My internet went, but I think looking over the plans in the beginning and picking up people say, I hope I can make an interesting comment. I just wanted to pick up on something Julia was saying. Actually, it was quite interesting that this idea of color and wayfinding fits quite neatly into what I was thinking about the project and references for you, because looking at particularly this perspective of one of the spaces where you have this kind of double height space, I think in the kind of third image, third panel, yeah, that one. That's very reminiscent of a kind of space in the Royal Festival Hall, which is a kind of building in London, kind of built post-war and built with certainly with a kind of very heavy social intent about the idea of creating kind of public space within buildings. And it kind of has a language that's very similar to also things like the Barbican Centre in London as well, with these kind of big, quite very large buildings that really prioritize a network of public spaces and generating a kind of space for encounter. And there was a kind of social, inherently kind of social or supposedly social ideal to that you create these spaces of encounter and social interaction. So that's one interpretation of it. It's very interesting that recently about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, the Barbican was redone, and they had to put a wayfinding strategy in that involved color because it was famously people were always lost. So it could be something that you do look at, but I am intrigued by these kind of spaces in relationship to that kind of ideology, I suppose, which is something you kind of touched on, and particularly in the city of LA, that a city is not necessarily linked to post-war Britain or ideologies of post-war Britain, but I think there's something in this idea of constructing or arranging a series of spaces that have this inherent social desire for encounter and for meeting and for unplanned meetings and for impromptu event to occur and the event to occur through encounter. And it might be something that you could choreograph to a greater degree in another set of drawings. I agree that in the plans that feels stronger than in the sections, apart from this one part, I think, where you start to see these multiple spaces occur and they're all looking on each other. But I think there's something really interesting in this and something I think really interesting from, not a great knowledge of LA, but something like this within the city, within that within that kind of urban condition that I think, is very intriguing.
Thank you, everybody, again. And Max, super awesome. I agree with Paul that as you try to pull this thing together for a portfolio world, you get that three-dimensional axonometric finish. I think we would love your project even more if we could see it in that way, especially when we have no models on a 2D world of the internet. I think also the conversation of narrative, your project began with the study of the Echo Park stairs related to your low rise. And that's what inspired your understanding also with theater and Atafalpia and things like that, that led you to such a sensitivity of understanding of those localized stair conditions, which was just gorgeous to see you work that out. And Ingelo pointed out its value. I just think that would also help to explain why you do what you do. It's really a lovely project, and you're very sensitive, as I think someone said, at the minutia, really good at that. And you work at a certain pace, and that's your pace. The overall image just needs to happen to just blow us out of the water. So I would try to get that, because I think it's really a great project, as the critics really clearly identify. Great working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move to the next one, Alex.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to come look at our projects. We really appreciate it. So my name is Alex Urasaki, and this is my project, Nomadic Corridors. So the project proposes a new approach to kind of density, especially the question of density in housing in LA, and one that through the architectural language of the corridor kind of questions the occupation of the interstitial, and as a result, creating a loose interior urbanism of varying thresholds. Kind of looking at the larger context of LA, it's full of these kind of interstitial spaces defined by their temporality and their informality. And the project really looks at an approach of what does it mean when you begin to occupy these. So then reflecting on the ideas of transience as it connects to this idea of occupying the interstitial, the project rejects the double loaded corridor rather than the program list leftover space. The corridor becomes this occupiable continuum, denying ideas of permanence or forever states, a fluid kind of condition of place. So then, informed by its direct context of Echo Park, the project pulls from paths of movement through the site, in which these diagrams could, I guess, most accurately be described as loose itineraries of various users and how they might move through the site. And those begin to define vectors or what these corridors begin to become. So then once overlaid and thickened, these corridors begin to shape the project, creating new spaces as they intersect, intertwine, and run parallel. So programmatically, the project takes a silty approach, the program floating or embedded within this larger thickened condition into smaller sequences of rooms, creating moments of tension as they run parallel and new programmatic hybrids as they collide. So kind of looking at these smaller sequences of how rather than a corridor being the in-between space, the corridor becomes a space itself and the programs become a sequence of rooms that have to be moved through. So another look at that kind of idea here on the ground site. The project site strategy is to pull back away from that corner of Sunset and Echo Park, allowing for this open market to inhabit the entire front corner of the site. And then some of those programmatic ideas can be seen here. Your restaurants here, your workspaces here, residential's here. And that corridor begins to become an enlarged mixing space. And then the ideas of privacy and public versus private are defined by the figure of how those walls begin to imply privacy or larger spaces through their length. So through their length and kind of and the corner conditions of the walls themselves, the project kind of denies this harsh threshold and is just a fluid state of moving through the project. So then kind of moving through these inextricable territories of rooms, incidental communication is favored over planned moments, where diversion, incidents, and accidents are promoted rather than denied. You can see kind of how those ideas begin to happen in section 2 as the thresholds begin to either peel away, reveal themselves, or create vertical connections, both visually and spatially. And from the exterior, GFR panels of various textures and color work to either reinforce or push back against this interior organization. So at a more detailed look at detail, the wall thickness through its porosity and material begin to also further articulate kind of at a smaller scale the ideas of defining what is private, what is public, what is loose, and what is defined. So then as a result, the project not only creates a new collective whole, but also through its loose thresholds and informal temporary spaces call into question the traditional status of place in the urban context. And then I can go back to whatever slide, or we can hop onto the concept board. Thank you all.
Holy smokes. If I say what I really think people are going to accuse me of playing favorites, I know Alex, but I got to say, it's really fantastic on a lot of levels. The drawings, the diagrams are amazing. I think so many of the things we've been asking for with the previous, or I've been asking for, several people have been asking for, they're kind of all, you've tackled all of them. I really like how you started out the discussion with an incredibly articulate, larger idea of what it was you're trying to accomplish here. And ultimately you weave together this formal agenda with a really weird mix of like kind of Morphosis meets Bernard Tschumi in terms of programmatic ambitions. Will it work? Meaning, do a lot of these hallway-like things and interstitial spaces work on a programmatic level? I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's part of our job as architects, is to put things out there, try to understand them in the best way that we can, and then test them in the real world. And I think, the part of the point of drawing these so well and modeling them so well is not simply so we have a cool drawing on the page. It's so we understand the possibility that they may work on a programmatic spatial level. I think you've done that fantastically. I think the amount of variation that shows up in the section equals that of the plans. And I've been wanting to see more of that. So congratulations, I'm blown away.
Thank you.
And it's not just because I know you.
Well, I agree, and I don't know you. I really enjoy sort of meandering through your plans and discovering, and exactly what Doyen's saying. Does it work? I don't know. I think it would take some time to really interrogate and literally walk through these pieces. And I wonder if a sort of a series of fly-throughs through this could actually help bring that alive and answer the critique. There's a farmer's market right down the street that happens every Friday. And this is a very heavily pedestrian neighborhood, very, very unusual for LA. And it's an incredible mix of people. And I can imagine them wandering through here. You've given the public plaza, that I long for. And then you have this sort of more private area. And so I would want to know how people can, and this is one of those corners that people cut across, because as you know, it's a parking lot right in front of the Lassen Foods and the pharmacy and Little Caesar. There's a funny mix of old and new program here. And of course, that's all gone, but there's still the vestige of the different types of users using the space. And the historical layers that I've already referenced to. And I think that you've accommodated that. And so congratulations, bravo. I think it's really, really well done.
Yeah. All right, Alexander, I'm going to push on the other side of that just a hair. And again, I concur. There's a lot of great things about this. I think that, one of the most generous things that you can do in Los Angeles is provide public shade. And I think you have plenty of that going in your project, but I'm not so sure you describe it, very well. The thing I'm going to push on you a little bit is I have no freaking clue what this looks like. You're showing like pieces and tiny little frames and little x-rays, and it's sort of like I kind of get the idea, I kind of know, but maybe I think Dwayne is probably using his imagination of his own language in there a little bit too much. I fear that the exterior might be like a Kaiser Hospital or some bizarre iteration like that, or something of a weird ilk, because sure, you have it sort of in your elevations, but I don't know. And again, on the comments of like maybe there's something anti-mask going on in the studio or something, but I'm not quite sure, besides these tiny little diagrams that you have on there, what the heck is going on with the overall project itself per se, and or you're very carefully showing the little scenes, but not the overall picture in a way too. But again, very nice, very, very intelligently done.
I think I really like the plans with the animations. I already wrote that in the chat, but I was really excited to see something moving and kind of this idea of these like linear movements through the building. And I think I agree with Scott that these kind of movements of the linearity could be something which could have been shown in kind of little animations through the space. So like the focus of like, how do you actually move so linearly, and what's the experience of that in the building? I see you have a couple of interior renderings, and I wanted to talk about those a bit more. Specifically, I was wondering with Stephen, why Paul Smith is not in this review, because every project we have seen so far has a little bit of pink in it, and this kind of theme of the color of pink seems to be something which kind of moves through the project. I was wondering if that was kind of given for the students, or if each of them just really likes pink. That was my first question for you, Alexander. And the second question, I was wondering what the meaning of the sheep is. Like in one rendering, you have a sheep on this little green island, and then also the fur. In your concept drawings, you have some fur on the facades. I really find it really interesting. So maybe you could speak towards the color, the sheep, and the fur.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to the fur because it came first. In kind of those initial formal studies where the fur pops up, it was kind of looking at this idea of inside outside, and how the removal kind of creates a different connection to it. And how, I guess, in a way, it was this idea of the interstitial in reference to the body itself. But I guess where the sheep pops up in the renders later on in its current state is just this idea of what kind of weird kind of conditions are created when you're forcing programs kind of to run parallel to each other that might otherwise be conflicting.
If I may just answer also something, I think that this idea of animals, especially like goats and sheep around buildings, is something I've come across recently. Like last year, I think when the fires were, there was this library in California where they like placed actually goats around the building to kind of eat up all the dried grass around the building in order to prevent the building catch fire. And so this is not something which is, I think, maybe you have known about or looked into, but this idea of having animals as well as people within an urban environment is something super interesting. And so I would encourage you to kind of look more into that. And then this kind of graphic, what you put into the concept drawings with the fur of the facade, I find it also really interesting and would be curious, like what kind of material that could be, or how you could kind of realize that in reality. I find that fascinating. So those were a couple of things I thought were really interesting in your project. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm struck by how completely counterintuitive this project is. It's a really smart project and really ambitious in ways that it starts with the argument that the corridor, which was in a sense a way to develop kind of senses of privacy. And you've then said, all right, if I use even more corridors, I can actually intensify the overlaps and connections and frictions between things. Because actually, usually one goes the opposite direction. You try to remove corridors, you try to remove the separations, you try to actually make spaces that are more like the kind of open public plazas where people can cross and have chance encounters because there aren't barriers, there aren't individual kind of channels that you have to walk down. You've kind of gone, like going to this flip side, not only have you made these kind of extraordinary plans and propositions, but you're suggesting that somehow by squeezing all program into corridor, you're now going to produce a totally different, and I think your view, almost a kind of utopian, different way in which space and social exchange can exist, because everything is a corridor, and therefore everything will be about the kind of cross-contamination, infection, ways that people are going to constantly be bumping into each other. I think the question of does it really work is I think totally fair. And then the other thing that I started getting worried about is that I absolutely adore your long section. And the reason why you did a long section is because it actually makes it look like the spaces are very long and vast and expansive. The cross section would reveal that everything's this tight, narrow series of banded corridors where there's not a lot of space, right? So this cross section, because it is along the length of your corridors, is very seductive and makes it feel like it's a collection of grand open spaces. But that's not what you're doing in your plans. So I think there's it's an extraordinary project. I think it's really, really smart. I come from a position where I try to get rid of corridors in every project we do. And so for you to go the opposite direction, I find to be amazing. But I'm not, and I think you've done a really good job of convincing us that it doesn't have the very problems that the cross-section would probably reveal. And I think the inhabitable, the perspective, would you actually want to be in this for a long period of time? How high are the walls? What are the connections between the different sides, et cetera? So, but really interesting, super interesting project.
I wonder, hi Alexander, that was really, really interesting project, and I agree with all the critics in terms of their analysis. I particularly like the starting point, and it had that very much that kind of Manhattan transcripts kind of feel to it, and the idea of essentially a body carving out space. Kind of going back to the comments, I suppose, some of the perspectives or these juxtapositions of materials and events and animals. I would really like to see that explored further, because I feel that the language you've developed is very, very strong. It's a very, very formal kind of thing in the city, but it's that sense of actually the process that you undertaken or that you undertook and the kind of explorations you started with were really about the idea of event and encounter. And I think that at the moment, when I look at the building, I look at this very beautiful thing, and I have to kind of imagine what these counters, and I get glimpses at them, which I think is very positive. But actually, I think as a designer, I think you could really go into that to really start to explore the idea of what you might encounter when and how you might make those elements or those the elements of the architecture and those events particularly strange and weird. Because that was kind of also where you were starting, you know, the kind of Kubrick corridor and the kind of oddness and the way that is both foreboding and strange, but also beautiful. And I think that's this project has the potential to really explore that kind of spatiality. And obviously, you're kind of finishing at this point. There's not you know, unless you wanted to do in your free time to go back to the project, but actually maybe starting with the nature of the mood or the atmosphere or the encounter, and then working out from that to the building could be a way of taking some of the key points of the design, but actually turning them into the core investigation. And I think it's there. I think that, you know, the project's so rich that you could take many strands of this, but I feel that the starting point and what these perspectives hint at, for me, is potentially a richer ground than the purely the formal exploration or the kind of formal representation that we see.
I'm going to jump in because we have to move on, but Alex, obviously your talent is so exceptional, and your ability to design, work through all these problems, draw, articulate, animate, speak, present, really just extremely, it's on the extreme level. My critiques are those similar to 2 points. Something Paul made a comment. I've gone through your plans with you, and we've had that discussion of this sort of way in which you've taken the vector and mapped it into a corridor. And I don't necessarily believe that's the only way it could happen. And I would maybe impress on you trying, you know, we tried to open up these spaces, but that thought, I think, has a question, it needs to be questioned. The other thing, I think you just understated the beauty of your plaza. You know, I mean, Ingalill pointed out to that and accepted it instantly, although there's no drawings of it. There's no the overall image of your design has a sophistication to say, hey, let's pull back to the far side, even the non-residential far side, and then build this incredible platform as space that is a public event space. And nowhere do we get the glory of that. There's no perspective of that. There's the 3D modeling showing that. And that is the most celebratory space. I think that's the reason why you shove everything up to the end conditions like that. So I would have wanted you to sell that. And if you're going to draw one more drawing, I would highly recommend that you put that together. It's obviously brilliant, and your drawing skills are so strong that they will ultimately also sometime belie the problems you designed. And I think all these critics are sharp enough to have found them. So I hope you saw that as well. Really amazing. No need to say good luck with you. All right, we're going to move forward.
Thank you to all the reviewers and to Stephen and the rest of the LA Metro instructors.
Yeah, we have to be very clear. This is not just me. This is Pavel. This is Teddy. This is Joanna. This was Jimenez a while ago. This is Ismail teaching all these incredible skills. So thank you. Let's go to the last. Varun.
Hi guys, thanks for joining. So I wanted to design a building that was very informed by the surrounding site and that would blend into the context. This began with the design of the massing, composed of 3 bars that run perpendicular to Sunset Boulevard and line up with the surrounding masses. The heads of the bars that face Sunset are a continuation of the existing commercial storefronts that are on the street. The distribution of the program within the bars was dictated by looking at the surrounding zoning and pulling down lines to distribute the commercial and residential spaces and give them the appropriate street frontage. Looking more specifically at the ground plans, we can see that the housing is pulled away and given its own separate mass along Logan Street. The boutique hotel and the retail are positioned along Echo Park Avenue. The office space is positioned in the middle bar, right behind the social services that sit right on Sunset Boulevard and are given this good location to highlight their importance and increase their accessibility to the public. The underbelly of the middle bar at the lower level houses a rec center that includes a public pool, lockers, basketball courts, and a gym that are all made accessible through elevators and stairs that open up to various sides of the building, and include some that pull down into almost like a gorge between two of the masses. In addition to pulling visitors down, circulation along the ground level is created through elevated walkways and cuts within the massing that create efficient routes of travel through the site. The exterior building was designed using a combination of sandstone and perforated metal panels to cloak the program of the building at the upper levels. On the street level, there's a generous use of glass to draw users into the building, whereas above, program is hidden and only the silhouettes of the windows are revealed through the perforations. This cloaking of the facade, along with the simple massing and injection of light wells that are never expressed in the elevation, give the section a quality, give visitors the sense of discovery within the section. In this section that cuts perpendicular to the bars, we can see the relationship between the public pool and Echo Park Avenue and how you would come down to the lower level. You can also see some of the light wells cutting through the housing and the elevated walkways that give the ground plane a sense of continuation through the site. In the other section, we can see the relationship between the courts and the pool and how the lockers sit in between them, and also the use of courtyards along the roof, one being a small private courtyard for the office space, and then a larger public courtyard that serves to connect various programs and create an outdoor gathering space for at the center of the building. Taking a closer look at the housing, 5 light wells cut through from the roof to the floor to create communal spaces and provide additional light and occasionally provide vertical circulation. Units of different income levels are all mixed together, and small commercial units or spaces are also injected into the housing level, into the housing block for the convenience of the residents. The facade was also articulated differently along the housing block and with the punch windows, making the use of that block much more transparent when compared to the rest of the building. Yeah, that's it. I can share my concept board.
Arun, I love parts of your project and I totally hate other parts of your projects. So I think sectionally and how you're organizing the program, I think are really, really nice. I think the sort of both sections, the cross section, has the use of light wells and sort of allowing sort of magical light to come from the heavens above down onto this, floor below, I think could potentially be really cool. And especially at the swimming pool. I think that's really, light, vertical light off a swimming pool can create these really awesome reflections, that again, this sort of, awesome sort of magical thing that you can discover within your project. Now, the things I hate, I think your facades and your two renderings, if I could call them that, are kind of bizarre. I know you're trying to differentiate between sort of what is housing and what is the rest of the project. And sure, I sort of applaud that. But I would argue both those facades are totally mean. They're tough, they're mean, and they border on, this weird, sort of pseudo corporate, Amazon warehousey, sort of keep out, and or I could definitely mistake them for each a parking garage, and I don't think that's your project at all. I think it wants to be, again, how you're handling the housing chunk of what you're saying is a fantastic idea of facade, and sort of breaking up and sort of breaking up scale for the community, etc. The other ones are very mean, very tough. So I would just again, be careful on some of that too. So maybe I regret my demand for massing. I can tell you're massing, but again, your sections, I think that's really the magic in your project.
Yeah, I agree with everything Scott said there, although I'm not sure hate is the right word. I actually find it really interesting, particularly coming off the last project where both of you are striving for a kind of vitality in the sections that I think actually works really well in this project. But you, on the facade, the goal seems to be absolutely to deny that on the street level and present almost what looks to me like a very austere kind of public building, like the archival, the Echo Park archives or something. And on one hand, I'm not opposed to that, but I do think that there ought to be something about it that's a little bit more curious, that doesn't present a modernist facade to us, that might be austere, but is somehow suggestive of the vitality that goes on in the interior and helps to somehow add to that, contribute to it a little bit more by offering a curiosity that might help us, help draw us in. So, my first reaction was, wow, I have no idea where you're going with this when I saw the massing and the facades, but I'm pretty convinced that the interior has some really spectacular moments. So it's just, I wonder what that might contribute to the exterior.
Yeah, I wanted to, I appreciate very much the restraint of the sort of partie, the proposal. And you're right, Dwayne, when you go inside, it becomes extremely vital. I appreciated when you were talking, Barun, about the social services. There's the health clinic on the corner that's been just such an important part, and it's in your photograph even, of this neighborhood. And it also references a sort of this vertical economic demographic that is such a, it is in conflict, but it's also somehow meshing at this moment with moments of sort of friction and interchange between, say, people coming into the neighborhood and those who are being priced out of the neighborhood, no question. And I think projects have to consider that. I mean, your facades are perfect tagging opportunities. And, I wonder what your thoughts are about how those facades will then participate in the landscape. And you talk about it very vitally in the interior of the project, and yet you also have to recognize this face that you're giving to this corner, this very important corner in this neighborhood. I know you're referencing the recreation. I'm suspecting you are. There's the rec center across the street. There's a lot of clubs, nightclubs. So there's this very, very interesting day-night difference in terms of traffic and how this corner is used and occupied. And I think about what the space would be like at night when there's a lot of people out on the streets, and it just seems a little too austere and a little frightening, in fact. So I think you need to recognize that when you're putting forward images like that. But that said, I agree. I think the section, you're providing a lot of thought and care in the section. And so I think just a little extra time on those exteriors and maybe punching through some of those corridors or those openings into the exterior might help.
Yeah, and I wonder, I think that you could make the argument that you're actually missing a key series of views that would make your project hold up to this criticism and respond to it, which is your views of the building tend to be from a distance where the building is a little bit mute. And I think, yeah, the shift, it can go in, I think the criticism of it looking like a parking structure or all the kind of mundane buildings you don't want to be compared to is totally fair. But what you would argue is that as you get closer to it and you look down and you're on the sidewalk in front and you look down these spaces, that it opens up, it reveals this kind of inner vitality. I think you're clearly referencing Grafton's university project in Milan, where it's only when you get close you start to see this experience and the space and the kind of connection in. And I think that those views that are on the sidewalk, almost that passing into the threshold of the building into this kind of, I think, quite wonderful section that emerges, that is hidden to a certain degree, or at least not put on display to the street as overtly, that would make the case, because that way you can say, look, it's subtlety. This is not about an overt kind of exuberant building. It's a building that reveals itself slowly. And I also think that your elevation, the space that you produce between the two buildings that has this kind of almost perfect proportions, but then I'll get elongated through the section, I think is really effective. I mean, in the world of, of the 4 projects we've looked at, it's by far the most reserved, but oddly might actually be one of the most effective public spaces, or at least outside spaces that's been produced, particularly how you've connected it into the building through the section that extends down to the ground. I just think you're not making the case for the quality of the project as effectively as you could, and you're actually making the case against your project. The other thing that I think is really weird is in the cross section, most of your light wells are just pure tubes. There's almost no apertures in the light wells, and I can't tell if that's intentional or not. They're all kind of which could be extraordinary, but then you lose the ability to capitalize on them on every floor. So anyways, I think the project is particularly, it's definitely the oddball relative to the other ones we've been looking at. And I like that contrast, but I think you want to make sure that you're really arguing for what the qualities are in the project as best as you can.
Hi, Varun. Is that how I pronounce your name? Yeah. Hi. Yeah, picking up on that, it is the odder one out of the odd one out and the 4 that we've seen. But I agree. I'm quite fascinated by that. It feels to me, and apologies for my kind of European-centric position, but it feels to me quite Swiss. And I know Grafton were referenced within it, but it feels to me, like a ETH kind of base project, it's kind of rational, and it's reserved, and it's very controlled. And I think there's something kind of interesting about that, and it would be interesting, to actually experience that within the context of Los Angeles, away from the kind of Swiss countryside or suburban context. I very much agree this idea that these internal spaces are I think are the things that would really sell the project. These are kind of quite potentially quite beautiful and potentially spaces that give you an escape away from an urban context, that surrounds it, that you provide something other or something different. But I think that actually how you communicate that, or how you sell that is I suppose the crux of the project. And I think it is a question of drawing. It is potentially a question of really investigating materialities about qualities of light, how the light, the very particular light that you get in Los Angeles would actually filter into these spaces, and how the materials might control that experience. I think it's potentially to go away and again, you know, visit this project after you've had a break, but think about, you know, what are the core aspects of any design proposal that make it unique or different from the things around it, or what your peers are doing, or what your colleagues are doing. And I think that this project does stand out because of its difference, but that's something you also have to acknowledge and sell in some way. And yeah, I'm kind of fascinated by it, and would be interested to experience it coming out of the, you know, the city of LA and moving into these kind of, you know, very cool spaces that you could, you know, formulate a very reflective and internal environment. It'd be very beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm sorry if I missed it. I'm curious about this physical model. Is it a physical model, or is it a rendering made look like a physical model?
No, I did test that. That's a physical model.
It's a physical model. How did you make that?
It was cast in Rockite. The base was cast, and then the masses were cast after that.
And you cast with concrete, or with what material?
With Rockite.
Okay, I think this is a really beautiful model, and I'm kind of interested to learn more at what point of the process you made that model in your project.
I made that kind of midway. Like I designed the massing, and then as I kind of went about it, I wanted to cloak the section, so I just designed the massing and then started making cuts within it. So it was kind of midway that I made the model.
No, I really like it, and I'm wondering, it's very different from the chunk what we then see on the right side, where you have a lot of windows in it all in a sudden, right? So I know you did a massing model, but there's something to learn from that, and perhaps take into the design of the building later on, where this kind of monolith aesthetic is a little bit lost then in the rendering of this axonometric drawing, because you no longer have this kind of you all of a sudden have transparency, and you get to see what's happening in the building and so on. And so I think maybe perhaps there is a lost opportunity to implement this kind of understandings what you got from that model more into your project. But I think the model is really fascinating, really beautiful, and I hope you will continue making more of those models.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the model, Julia, because I agree, Varun. I mean, it is beautiful, and I can imagine it took a lot of time and care. And there's a quietness and elegance to it. And it makes me wonder then about using a similar technique for the skin, right? That you might then begin to explore in physical model making, since that seems to be a good place that you enjoy. And that could be a really masterful, wonderful exploration.
I don't know if anyone wants to say any last words. Varun, I've always enjoyed your scheme. I thought it was very unique and interesting. I mean, it seems simple, and you know, the way in which it handles sunset as a series of buildings, but separated with distance between, it seemed to make some interesting sense. Very clear, very direct in the way in which you handled even the sections. And I think we all pointed out how the sections are so strong. I do feel you kind of fell short of your own talent in the way in which you developed the elevations. I don't really know why. You know, there's a good team here to help you with that, but it seems to me it should have been much more translucent, transparent, much more softer and beautiful, and really would have allowed also the way in which those edge conditions on that short section relate to the spaces, you know, of indoor outdoor, I think could have worked a little bit harder. to been really quite sophisticated, and probably this building required that. Also, even at the roof plan and the occupiability of roof, it just seems, and what that sunset elevation is how you sell the project. And I think Paul and everybody pointed that out to you. It's like the scheme is plausible. It's different. It's not an aggregated scheme. It's a very different one, but it's residential in some ways, or could have felt that way on the Sunset side. And on the other two sides, Echo Park maybe would have been more of a problem, but you could have found a way to develop that. And so I just feel like that somehow didn't happen. I don't really entirely know why, but maybe you could go back to it. That would be my recommendation to you moving forward, because the amount of effort and design talent in the sections and in the overall strategy are really powerful.
Thanks.
So
I just added
please.
a link in the chat of an architect, which I think you should be looking at how he deals with facades, and I think you might like his work, as he works a lot with stone also.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. If the reviewers have any last words of wisdom for the team,
I just want
always
to say,
appreciated.
I just want to say one thing quickly, which is that one of the downsides about a review on such a large project is that it's impossible to get in and talk about all of the decisions and design operations, and even the subtlety at which many of the four of you approached even the plan making of an apartment. And I think that the level of development on all four was really exceptional. It's not easy to design, this many, almost, what, 250,000 square feet in a short period of time, and have a conceptual agenda and develop a kind of formal argument and start to address tectonics and construction. So I thought that the fact that all four brought a kind of ambition were not what I would call kind of cookie cutter familiar projects, but actually idiosyncratic in interesting ways. I thought it was fantastic. So my compliments to the students and to the faculty.
Yeah, and I concur with all of that, I think people heard me before everything came on. I would take full advantage of Stephen and the faculty and everybody in all the reviews. I mean, I'm impressed with the list of reviewers, and I love that. I would absolutely, as a student, be thrilled to sit on everybody's review, etc., and learn. I mean, holy crap! It's a lot of icons of architecture to look at and hear from, and take full advantage of Stephen and his crew, and the crew is amazing as well. So very good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this morning. So thank you for inviting me, Stephen, and the faculty. The students, you spoke so powerfully about your work and showed so much commitment. So you should all be congratulated. I know how challenging it's been, but the work has, I've been on reviews for many years now for Cal Poly, sorry, I was about to say Pomona, SLO, Pomona too. But the work I see absolutely no difference in the quality. So that's really, to all of you, that keeping the energy up, well done. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, congrats to all the students and faculty. Thanks, Stephen, for inviting me, and looking forward to see you all soon.
Yes, seeing everybody in person will be amazing. We're actually having an exhibition at the Helms opening up on June 17th and 18th, or 19th. We haven't launched that out, but it's going to be a physical thing. And some of this work will be there. So that'll be super fun. There's 30 architects that are going to present their housing. Low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise. Yes, sorry. Anyway, great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for coming out this morning. And the students are just incredible. And it's a pleasure having the opportunity. And again, Pavel and Teddy, Joanna, Izzy. Fabio showed up here. He's our structural. Y'all know Fabio. But I don't know if he's got a visual face there.
Yeah, I don't know. The face is not coming, but it's okay. I see you all. I listen with very much pleasure to all the feedback from the critiques. It gives so much insight. And as always, I'm blown away. I saw these projects 2 weeks ago and I was like, nothing is coming out of this. And then today I see these projects and they are fully developed, and it's like seeing, you know, fully developed architects that have worked on this for 5 years, and it blows my mind every time. I never cease to be impressed by that, and it's fantastic. So thank you for having me, Stephen.
Thank you for helping us.
Lovely seeing everybody. It was really,
Great to
really
see
fun.
you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye,
thank you, everyone.
everybody.
Have a great rest of your day. And we have 2 more reviews to do. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.